You're not unlucky. You're not under-resourced. You chose this. Every morning you vote for your future. Most people vote mediocre. This isn't motivation. This is a mirror. In 10 years, you'll be somewhere. Designed or defaulted. Mediocrity doesn't announce itself. It whispers tomorrow. Your potential has an expiration date. It's closer than you think. What if the only thing separating you from extraordinary is a decision you keep postponing? What if mediocrity isn't a circumstance, but a series of tiny surrenders you stopped noticing? There's a specific moment most people abandon their potential. You've already passed it. The highest performers share one brutal habit, and it has nothing to do with discipline. By the end of this audiobook, you'll know exactly which of your beliefs are keeping you average. This audiobook won't comfort you, it will corner you. But in that corner, that's where your real life is waiting. Let me tell you about a man named David, 42 years old, software engineer at a respectable company, good salary, nice house in the suburbs, 2 cars in the garage. By every external measure, David had made it. His parents were proud. His neighbors were envious. His LinkedIn profile looked impressive. But David had a secret that ate at him every single night as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling. He had stopped growing 15 years ago. The last time he felt genuinely alive, genuinely challenged, genuinely excited about what tomorrow might bring, he was 27. That year, he'd been offered a position at a startup. The pay was 50% less. The risk was enormous. The opportunity was unlike anything he'd ever seen. He said no. He chose comfort. He chose safety. He chose the predictable path. And for 15 years, that choice had calcified into what he now called his life. One night, his daughter asked him a question that cracked something open inside him. She said, "Dad, what do you dream about?" And David realized he couldn't answer her. He'd stopped dreaming so long ago that he couldn't remember what it felt like to want something that scared him. That night, something shifted. But the shift didn't come from inspiration. It came from horror. The horror of realizing that the comfortable life he'd built was actually a beautifully decorated cage, and the door had never been locked. This is the truth most people spend their entire lives running from. Mediocrity is not something that happens to you. Mediocrity is something you choose. Not once, in some dramatic moment of surrender, but thousands of times, in tiny decisions that feel inconsequential until you look up and realize they've formed the bars of your prison. The small voice that says, "Stay in bed," instead of getting up early. The hesitation that says, "Maybe next month," instead of right now. The rationalization that says other people can do that, but not someone like me. Each one of these tiny surrenders feels insignificant in the moment. Each one feels reasonable. Each one feels like it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. But that's the trap, because the grand scheme of things is nothing more than the accumulation of these small moments. Your life isn't shaped by the big decisions you make once in a while. Your life is shaped by the small decisions you make every single day. David knew this. By the time his daughter asked him about his dreams, he had made millions of these small decisions. Millions of tiny votes for safety over possibility, for comfort over growth, for the predictable path over the uncertain one. And each vote had seemed so reasonable at the time. Each vote had seemed like the mature, responsible, sensible thing to do. But the aggregate of those votes was a life that felt more like a slow suffocation than a journey. You're listening to this right now, and some part of you is hoping I'll give you a shortcut. Some part of you is waiting for the secret formula, the life hack, the morning routine that will transform everything without requiring you to actually change. I need you to kill that part right now. What I'm about to share with you over the next several hours is not comfortable. It's not reassuring. It will not validate your excuses or make you feel good about where you are. What it will do is tell you the truth. And the truth is the only thing that has ever set anyone free. Let's start with something that might make you defensive. Good. Defensiveness is just the ego protecting its favorite lies. The modern world has engineered comfort to an unprecedented degree. Think about it. You can order food without speaking to another human being. You can watch unlimited entertainment without leaving your bed. You can maintain the illusion of social connection without the vulnerability of real relationship. You can spend an entire lifetime without ever being genuinely, seriously uncomfortable. And this, right here, is the conspiracy against your potential. Your brain evolved in an environment where comfort was scarce and survival required constant effort. The neurological systems that kept your ancestors alive were built around a simple premise. Conserve energy when possible. Seek safety when available. Avoid unnecessary risk at all costs. These systems made perfect sense when a single injury could mean death, when food scarcity was a real threat, when the unknown genuinely might contain predators that would end your life. But here's the problem. Those systems are still running. Right now, in your brain, ancient software is making decisions about your modern life. And that software has one primary directive: keep you comfortable, keep you safe, keep you alive. The software doesn't understand that in the modern world, the greatest threat to your survival isn't a predator in the bushes. The greatest threat to your survival is a life unlived. The software can't compute that comfort, taken to its logical extreme, becomes a form of death. A slow, painless, barely noticeable death of everything that makes life worth living. When you feel the pull toward comfort, when you hear that voice telling you to stay in bed, to skip the workout, to avoid the difficult conversation, to postpone the scary decision, you're not hearing wisdom. You're hearing ancient survival programming that has no idea how to navigate the world you actually live in. That voice sounds like reason. It sounds like self-care. It sounds like balance. But it's none of those things. It's fear dressed in comfortable clothing. It's avoidance wearing a reasonable mask. It's the part of you that would rather stay safe and small than risk the discomfort required to become who you're capable of being. Let me give you an example. Marcus was a middle manager at a technology company. He was competent, reliable, well-liked. His performance reviews were consistently good, not exceptional, not groundbreaking. Good. And for years, that was enough, until it wasn't. One day, Marcus realized something that changed everything. He realized that his entire career had been shaped by one principle. Don't make waves. Every decision he'd made, every project he'd taken on, every opportunity he'd accepted or declined, had been filtered through that single lens. Would this create conflict? Would this draw unwanted attention? Would this make someone uncomfortable? If the answer was yes, Marcus avoided it. Not consciously, not intentionally, but consistently. The result was a career that was safe, stable, and utterly meaningless. Marcus had optimized for comfort so successfully that he'd optimized out everything that could have made his work matter. The turning point came when a younger colleague got promoted over him. The colleague wasn't smarter than Marcus, wasn't more experienced, but she did something Marcus never did. She made waves. She challenged assumptions. She pushed back on bad ideas. She advocated for changes that made people uncomfortable, and she got results. Results that Marcus was capable of getting, but had never pursued because pursuing them would have required discomfort. That night, Marcus sat in his car in the parking lot for an hour before driving home. He wasn't angry at his colleague. He was angry at himself, because he finally understood that his comfort had been the most expensive thing he'd ever purchased. He'd paid for it with his potential, and that was a price that no amount of rationalization could justify. And here's where it gets really uncomfortable. You've been obeying that programming, not sometimes, constantly. Every time you chose the easy path, every time you settled for good enough, every time you told yourself you'd start tomorrow, you were following orders from a part of your brain that is fundamentally incapable of understanding your potential. I want you to consider something. What has comfort actually cost you? Not in theory, in your actual life. How many opportunities have you declined because they felt risky? How many conversations have you avoided because they felt awkward? How many versions of yourself have you abandoned because becoming them felt hard? There's a phrase people use that reveals everything. They say, "I'm comfortable with my life," and they say it like it's a good thing, like comfort is the goal, like arriving at comfort means you've won. But what if comfort isn't the destination? What if comfort is the quicksand? What if the moment you feel truly comfortable is the moment you should be most alarmed? Let me tell you about a study that should disturb you. Researchers looked at what they called satisficers versus maximizers. Satisficers are people who make decisions based on what's good enough. Once an option meets their minimum criteria, they take it and move on. Maximizers are people who keep searching, keep pushing, keep looking for the best possible option. You might think maximizers would be less happy. After all, they're never satisfied. But here's what the research found. In the short term, satisficers experience less stress. They make decisions faster. They don't agonize. But over the long term, satisficers showed lower levels of life satisfaction. They had more regrets. They were more likely to wonder what might have been. The good enough trap isn't just about decisions. It's about the entire orientation of your life. When good enough becomes your standard, you stop growing. When good enough becomes acceptable, you start dying. Not physically, spiritually, psychologically. The part of you that was meant for more begins to atrophy like a muscle you never use. I spoke with a woman once who had achieved what most people would call success. She was a senior partner at a law firm. She made 7 figures. She had the house, the car, the vacation home, all of it. And she was absolutely miserable. When I asked her what happened, she told me a story I've never forgotten. She said, "I made partner at 34, and I remember the day it was announced. Everyone was congratulating me. Champagne was flowing. I was supposed to feel like I'd arrived. But that night, I went home and sat in my empty apartment and felt nothing. Worse than nothing. I felt this creeping dread because I realized I had spent 12 years climbing a ladder that was leaning against the wrong wall. I had won a game I never actually wanted to play, and now I was trapped by my own success, The golden handcuffs were real. She had made it, and making it had unmade her. This is what comfort does when you're not paying attention. It gives you what you think you want while stealing what you actually need. It offers security while eroding your soul. It promises safety while building your prison one comfortable day at a time. Let me ask you something directly. When was the last time you did something that scared you? Not the everyday kind of scared, not the kind of fear that comes from watching a horror movie or almost missing a deadline. I mean genuinely scared, the kind of fear that comes from risking something real, from betting on yourself, from stepping into the unknown with no guarantee of success. If you can't remember, that's the problem. That's the symptom of a life optimized for comfort. That's the evidence that you've been playing it too safe for too long. There's another question worth considering. What would you attempt if you knew you could not fail? That question reveals what you actually want. The gap between what you're doing and what you would do if failure were impossible is the exact size of your fear. And that fear, masquerading as prudence, is what's keeping you mediocre. Your brain is not your friend when it comes to growth. Let me say that again because it's important. Your brain is not your friend when it comes to growth. Your brain's job is to keep you alive, not to help you thrive. These are fundamentally different objectives. Staying alive is about avoiding threat, minimizing risk, conserving resources. Thriving is about seeking challenge, embracing risk, spending resources in pursuit of growth. Every time you feel resistance to something that would help you grow, that's your brain doing its job. Every time you feel fear about pursuing your potential, that's your survival programming working perfectly. The problem isn't that your brain is broken. The problem is that your brain is doing exactly what it evolved to do. And what it evolved to do is no longer what you need it to do. So how do you override millions of years of evolution? You start by understanding that discomfort is not a bug. Discomfort is a feature. Discomfort is the currency of growth. You cannot buy transformation with comfort. You can only buy transformation with discomfort. The gym works because it's uncomfortable. Learning works because it's uncomfortable. Difficult conversations work because they're uncomfortable. Everything that has ever upgraded your life required you to be uncomfortable first. I want you to think about the last week of your life. How many times did you choose comfort over growth? How many times did you take the easy path when the hard path was available? How many votes did you cast for mediocrity? There's a myth that has shaped your life more than you realize. It's so embedded in our culture that you probably don't even recognize it as a myth. You probably think it's just how things are. The myth is this: some people are naturally talented and others are not. Some people are born with gifts and others are born ordinary. Some people have what it takes, and others, well, they're just not built for greatness. This is a lie. A convenient, comfortable, socially acceptable lie. And it's killing more potential than any other belief system on the planet. Let me tell you what the research actually shows. In study after study, in domain after domain, the evidence points to the same uncomfortable conclusion. What we call talent is mostly just head start plus deliberate practice. The people we point to as naturally gifted are almost always people who started earlier, practiced more deliberately, and accumulated thousands of hours of refinement that we never witnessed. We see the performance. We don't see the preparation. We see the talent. We don't see the 10,000 decisions that created it. Consider what happens when you see someone who seems effortlessly excellent. A musician who makes it look easy. An athlete whose movements seem almost supernatural. A writer whose prose flows like water. An entrepreneur who seems to have the Midas touch. What you're seeing is the iceberg's tip. Beneath the surface, invisible to you, are years of struggle, thousands of hours of practice, countless failures, hundreds of moments when they wanted to quit but didn't. What looks like effortless talent is actually the residue of tremendous effort, compressed into a performance so smooth it erases the evidence of the work that created it. We don't see this because we don't want to see it. Seeing it would be inconvenient. If that musician's excellence came from practice rather than divine gift, then we have no excuse for our own lack of musical ability. If that entrepreneur's success came from persistent iteration rather than innate business sense, then we can't comfort ourselves with the belief that some people are just born to succeed and we're not among them. The talent myth is a defense mechanism. It protects us from the uncomfortable truth that we could be more than we are if we were willing to do what it takes. There was a fascinating study done with violinists at a prestigious music academy. Researchers divided the violinists into 3 groups based on their professors' assessments. The best violinists, who were predicted to become international soloists. Good violinists, who were predicted to join professional orchestras. And average violinists, who were predicted to become music teachers. Then the researchers looked at how many hours each group had practiced by the age of 20. The results were staggering. The elite violinists had accumulated an average of 10,000 hours of deliberate practice. The good violinists had accumulated around 8,000. The average violinists had accumulated around 5,000. And here's the crucial finding. The researchers could not identify a single elite violinist who had achieved their position with significantly less practice than the others. There were no naturals. There were no people who just had it. There was only variation in how early they started and how deliberately they practiced. But this research came with an uncomfortable implication that most people ignore. If talent is mostly accumulated practice, then your mediocrity isn't about your genes. It's about your choices. If the violinists who became world-class simply practiced more deliberately and more consistently than those who didn't, then your ceiling isn't biological. It's behavioral. This is why the talent myth is so seductive. It lets you off the hook. If some people are just naturally gifted and you're not one of them, then there's nothing you can do about it. You can relax into your mediocrity and comfort yourself with the belief that it was never up to you anyway. The talent myth is the ultimate excuse. It's biological determinism dressed up as humble self-awareness. But what if you've been wrong? What if the abilities you dismissed as not your thing are actually abilities you simply haven't developed yet? What if the only thing standing between you and mastery is the 10,000 hours you've been spending on distraction instead of deliberate practice? I met a man who started playing guitar at 47. He had wanted to play his entire life, but had convinced himself he wasn't musical. He told himself he didn't have rhythm. He told himself he was too old. He told himself people who became great at guitar had something he lacked. Then his daughter started taking lessons, and he decided to join her. Just for fun, just to spend time with her. Within 2 years, he was playing in a local band. Within 4 years, he was teaching lessons. He told me something I'll never forget. He said, I spent 47 years believing a lie about myself. 47 years. And the lie felt so true that I never even questioned it. I just accepted that music wasn't for me. Now I play every single day, and it brings me more joy than almost anything in my life. How many other lies am I believing? How much else have I given up on because I decided it wasn't in my genes? Here's the thing about the talent myth. It doesn't just stop you from starting. It stops you from continuing. When you believe that success comes from natural ability, every failure becomes evidence that you lack the necessary gifts. Every setback becomes proof that you should quit. Every struggle becomes confirmation that this isn't for you. But when you understand that success comes from accumulated practice, failure means something completely different. Failure means you're in the process. Failure means you're accumulating experience. Failure means you're exactly where every master was before they became a master. The 10,000-hour rule that became popular years ago was both a blessing and a curse. It was a blessing because it revealed that excellence is built, not born. It was a curse because people misunderstood what it actually meant. 10,000 hours of mindless repetition produces nothing but wasted time. What produces excellence is deliberate practice. Deliberate practice means practicing at the edge of your current ability. It means constant feedback. It means fixing specific weaknesses rather than reinforcing existing strengths. It means discomfort. There's that word again, discomfort. Deliberate practice is uncomfortable by definition. If your practice feels easy, you're not practicing deliberately. You're just performing what you already know. And performance doesn't produce growth. Only practice produces growth. Only discomfort produces growth. I want you to think about something. What abilities have you dismissed as not possible for you? What have you decided you're just not built for? And what if those decisions are lies? What if those abilities are not only possible for you, but waiting for you? Waiting for you to stop believing the myth and start putting in the hours. There's a woman named Diana who became a best-selling author in her 60s. She'd worked as an accountant her entire career. She'd always wanted to write, but had convinced herself that writers were a special breed she didn't belong to. When she retired, she started writing. Not because she suddenly believed in herself, but because she figured she had nothing to lose. Her first book took her 3 years to write. It was rejected by 47 agents before one finally said yes. That book spent 18 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. When interviewers ask her about her talent, she laughs. She says, "Talent had nothing to do with it. Stubbornness and ignorance did. I was too stubborn to quit and too ignorant to know I was supposed to." Diana didn't have talent. Diana had persistence. Diana had hours. Diana had the willingness to keep going when anyone reasonable would have stopped. And that willingness is available to you right now. It's not genetic. It's not predetermined. It's a choice. The same choice you've been making in the opposite direction every time you tell yourself you're not talented enough, smart enough, gifted enough, special enough. You are special enough. Not because you have some hidden reserve of natural ability, but because you have the same capacity for deliberate practice as every master who ever lived. The only question is whether you'll use it. Let's talk about something you're probably very good at. Making excuses. I don't mean that as an insult. I mean it as a recognition of reality. The human mind is perhaps the most sophisticated excuse-generating machine ever created. We can rationalize anything. We can explain away any failure. We can construct elaborate justifications for any choice, no matter how self-destructive. And we do this not because we're weak or stupid, but because excuses serve a psychological purpose that most people never understand. An excuse is a shield. An excuse protects you from a truth that feels too painful to face. When you say you don't have time, you're protecting yourself from the truth that you haven't made this a priority. When you say you don't have the resources, you're protecting yourself from the truth that people with fewer resources have achieved more. When you say it's not the right time, you're protecting yourself from the truth that there's never a right time, and waiting is just another form of refusing. Here's what makes excuses so insidious. They feel like explanations. When you generate an excuse, it doesn't feel like you're making something up. It feels like you're accurately describing reality. Of course, you couldn't pursue that opportunity. You had obligations. Of course, you couldn't take that risk. You had responsibilities. Of course, you couldn't do what they did. Your situation was different. The excuses feel true because your brain has constructed them to feel true. Your brain has crafted them specifically to bypass your conscious awareness and present themselves as objective facts rather than subjective interpretations. The excuse machinery runs constantly, largely outside your awareness. You don't decide to make excuses. You find yourself making them. They appear fully formed, perfectly reasonable, entirely convincing. And because they feel like observations rather than inventions, you never think to question them. You never ask whether the excuse is true. You never wonder if you could find evidence against it. You accept it and move on, grateful for the explanation that lets you off the hook. But ask yourself this: why does your brain go to such lengths to protect you from taking action toward your potential? What is it really protecting? The answer is always the same. Your brain is protecting you from two things: the possibility of failure and the responsibility of success. Let me tell you about two brothers, same parents, same upbringing, same neighborhood, same schools, same opportunities. By age 30, one was a successful entrepreneur. The other was still living in his childhood bedroom, working a job he hated, spending his nights playing video games and telling anyone who would listen about all the businesses he was going to start someday. What separated them wasn't intelligence or resources or luck. It was their relationship with excuses. The successful brother had the same excuses available to him. He heard the same voices telling him it wasn't the right time. He didn't have enough money. The market was too crowded. He should wait until conditions were better. But he chose not to listen. He chose to act despite the excuses. He chose to treat his excuses as obstacles to overcome rather than verdicts to accept. The other brother made the opposite choice. He collected excuses like trophies. He polished them. He presented them to anyone who questioned why he wasn't further along. And each excuse, reasonable as it seemed, was another brick in the wall between him and the life he could have lived. The possibility of failure is obvious. If you try and fail, you'll have to face that you weren't good enough. At least, not yet. That hurts. The ego doesn't like it. So your brain generates reasons why you shouldn't try in the first place. If you don't try, you can't fail. And if you can't fail, your ego stays safely intact. But the responsibility of success is something most people never consider. What happens if you actually pursue your potential and you succeed? Then you have to maintain that success. You have to become the person who achieved it. You have to live up to a new standard, and that's terrifying in its own way. Success creates expectations. Success eliminates excuses. Success means you can never go back to pretending you couldn't do it. There was a man who came to a seminar I was attending years ago. He was brilliant. Everyone could see it. He had ideas that made the most successful people in the room lean forward in their chairs. He had insights that made seasoned entrepreneurs take notes. And he had done absolutely nothing with any of it. When someone asked him why he hadn't built a company around his ideas, his answer was a masterclass in excuse architecture. "The market isn't ready," he said. "I need more capital. I'm waiting for the right co-founder. The timing isn't quite right. Regulations make it too difficult. My family needs me too much right now." Each excuse was perfectly reasonable in isolation. Each excuse sounded completely legitimate. And together, they had formed a prison so elegant he couldn't even see the bars. A year later, I saw him again. Same brilliant ideas, same reasonable excuses, same prison. He had become so skilled at generating explanations for his inaction that he had convinced himself he was being strategic when he was actually just being scared. How many of his excuses do you share? How many of his explanations have you borrowed for your own life? The brutal truth is that someone with your exact circumstances, your exact background, your exact resources, has achieved what you're telling yourself is impossible. Someone with less time has built what you say you don't have time for. Someone with less money has created what you say you can't afford to pursue. Someone with more obstacles has overcome what you've surrendered to. This isn't a judgment, it's a fact. And this fact means your excuses, as reasonable as they feel, are not actually describing reality. They're protecting you from it. Let's do an exercise right now. I want you to think of your 3 biggest excuses, the 3 reasons you most often give for why you haven't pursued your potential. Got them? Now I want you to ask yourself a question about each one. What would I do if this excuse weren't true? If time wasn't the issue, what would you do? If money wasn't the issue, what would you do? If circumstances weren't the issue, what would you do? Notice how quickly your brain generates new excuses to replace the ones you just removed. That's how the machinery works. Excuses are not in short supply. Your brain will manufacture as many as necessary to keep you comfortable. The question isn't whether you have excuses. Everyone has excuses. The question is whether you're going to obey them. There's a concept called secondary gain that explains why we keep behaviors that clearly aren't serving us. Secondary gain means that even negative patterns provide some benefit, some payoff, some psychological reward. The excuse pattern has tremendous secondary gain. It protects your ego. It eliminates risk. It maintains the comfortable status quo. It lets you feel like a victim rather than a volunteer. It preserves relationships with people who might be threatened by your success. It keeps expectations manageable. The secondary gain of your excuses is enormous, and until you understand what you're getting from them, you'll never let them go. I want you to think about your primary excuse, the one you return to most often. What are you getting from it? Not what is it costing you. What is it giving you? What would you have to face if you no longer had it? The answer to that question is probably scarier than anything I've said so far, because the answer reveals what you're really avoiding. And what you're really avoiding is the same thing every person avoiding their potential is avoiding: the full weight of your own agency. The terrifying, exhilarating, crushing, liberating truth that you are responsible for your life. Not your circumstances, not your history, not your genetics, not the economy, not the government, not your parents, not your childhood, not the people who wronged you, not the system. You. You are responsible. And that responsibility is exactly what your excuses have been protecting you from. But here's what most people miss. Responsibility isn't a burden. Responsibility is power. If you're responsible, that means you can change things. If you're responsible, that means you're not a victim. If you're responsible, that means the same force that created your current life can create a different one. The moment you stop making excuses is the moment you reclaim your power. And power, real power, is what transforms mediocrity into excellence. Think about two people facing the same setback. The first person says, "This happened to me. It's not fair. It's not my fault. There's nothing I could have done." The second person says, "This happened. What can I learn? How can I grow? What's my next move?" Same setback, completely different relationship to it. The first person is a victim. The second person is a protagonist. The first person is passive. The second person is active. The first person stays stuck. The second person moves forward. The difference isn't what happened. The difference is who they choose to be in relationship to what happened. This brings us to something I call decision debt. Every choice you avoid, every commitment you postpone, every question you leave unanswered accrues interest. And that interest compounds over time until you're so overwhelmed by unmade decisions that making any decision feels impossible. I want you to do something right now. Close your eyes and picture a room. This room represents your mind. Now imagine that every unmade decision in your life is an object in this room. The career change you've been considering but haven't committed to, that's a chair in the corner. The conversation you need to have with your partner, that's a table in the middle of the floor. The health changes you've been putting off, that's a bookshelf against the wall. The creative project you've been meaning to start, that's a couch. The financial decisions you've been avoiding, that's a desk covered in papers. Now look around this room. How much furniture is in it? Can you still move freely? Can you find what you're looking for? Or has the room become so cluttered with unmade decisions that you can barely navigate it? This is what decision debt does to your mind. Each unmade decision takes up space. Each postponed choice adds furniture. Until eventually, the room is so full you can't move. You can't think. You can't do anything except feel overwhelmed by the sheer volume of things you've been avoiding. Think about your life right now. How many open loops are running in the background of your mind? How many things have you been meaning to decide but haven't? How many questions are you carrying that you could have answered weeks or months or years ago? Each one of those unmade decisions is costing you, not someday, right now. Cognitive science has demonstrated that the human brain has limited working memory. Every open loop, every unmade decision, every unresolved question takes up space in that working memory. It's like having 20 browser tabs open on a computer with limited RAM. Everything slows down. Focus becomes impossible. Energy drains without you even knowing where it's going. The sensation is familiar to almost everyone, but rarely identified. That vague sense of being behind, of having too much to do, of never quite being caught up. That feeling of mental fog that descends in the afternoon. The difficulty concentrating on one thing because 12 other things keep pulling at your attention. These aren't character flaws. They're symptoms of decision debt. They're the interest payments you make every day for the decisions you've been postponing. This is why high performers are obsessive about clearing decision debt. They understand that the cost of postponing a decision is usually higher than the cost of making a wrong decision. They understand that speed and clarity are more valuable than perfection and certainty. They decide fast, adjust as needed, and keep their cognitive bandwidth free for the things that actually matter. But most people do the opposite. Most people postpone decisions in the name of keeping options open. They wait for more information. They delay for the right moment. They gather more input. And in doing so, they accumulate so much decision debt that they become paralyzed. The irony is that by trying to keep options open, they close their best options. Opportunities don't wait. The universe doesn't pause while you make up your mind. The partnership you were considering moves on to someone else. The market you were evaluating shifts to a different reality. The relationship you were ambivalent about finds someone who isn't. There's a paradox at work here that most people never see. The more options you try to keep open, the fewer options you actually have. Because options require action to become real. An option that isn't exercised isn't an option at all. It's an illusion of an option. It's the feeling of possibility without the reality of possibility. And that feeling might actually be worse than having no options at all, because it gives you the sense that you're rich in possibilities when you're actually bankrupt in action. Let me tell you about a decision that changed someone's life. A woman I know was offered 2 jobs at the same time. One was safe, good company, stable industry, clear path, good benefits, reasonable work-life balance. The other was risky, startup, uncertain industry, unclear path, equity instead of salary, demanding hours. She spent 3 weeks agonizing over the decision. She made pro and con lists. She consulted friends. She talked to mentors. She ran financial models. And at the end of 3 weeks, she was exactly as confused as when she started. More confused, actually, because now she had even more information pulling her in different directions. Finally, she made a choice. Not because she achieved clarity, but because she realized the cost of not deciding was becoming higher than the cost of being wrong. She took the startup job. 2 years later, the company was acquired and her equity made her independently wealthy. But here's the thing. She told me later that the money wasn't the real win. The real win was what the decision taught her about herself. She said, "I learned that I could survive uncertainty. I learned that my fear of being wrong was worse than actually being wrong. I learned that my best life was on the other side of the decisions I was afraid to make. Now I decide faster than anyone I know, and most of my decisions turn out fine. Not because I'm smarter, but because I'm not burning energy on indecision anymore. That energy goes into execution instead. There's a formula I've seen work again and again. For any decision that is reversible, decide within 24 hours. Don't gather more information. Don't consult more people. Don't wait for a sign. Decide. For any decision that is irreversible, decide within 72 hours with whatever information you have. If you don't have enough information to decide in 72 hours, you probably never will. At some point, you have to act despite uncertainty. That's what decision-making actually is. Here's what most people don't understand. A wrong decision made quickly usually beats a right decision made slowly. Not always, but usually. Because a quick wrong decision generates feedback. It creates learning. It produces data you can use to make a better decision next time. A slow, right decision might be too late by the time it arrives. The window might have closed. The opportunity might have moved on. The person might have found someone else. Speed has a value that most people chronically underestimate. There's also something deeper happening with decision debt. Unmade decisions don't just consume cognitive resources, they erode your trust in yourself. Every time you postpone a decision, you send yourself a message. The message is, you can't handle this. You need more time. You're not capable of deciding right now. And that message compounds just like financial interest. Over time, you become someone who doesn't trust themselves to make decisions. You become someone who second-guesses everything. You become someone who needs external validation before taking any action. Decision debt doesn't just drain your energy, it dismantles your agency. I want you to think about the decisions you're currently postponing, the ones that are consuming background processing in your mind right now. What would happen if you made all of them today? Not perfectly, just made them. What would it feel like to clear that debt? What would you be able to focus on if those open loops were finally closed? The decisions you're avoiding are not protecting you, they're draining you. Every day you don't decide is a day you're paying interest on cognitive debt. And unlike financial debt, you can't see the interest compounding. You just feel it as exhaustion, as overwhelm, as the vague sense that you're drowning and you're not sure why. Close the loops, make the calls, send the emails, have the conversations, answer the questions, do it imperfectly. Do it scared. Do it uncertain. Just do it. The relief on the other side is worth more than any guarantee of getting it right. There's a saying that captures this perfectly. Done is better than perfect. Most people hear that and think it means producing low-quality work. That's not what it means. It means that completion has a value that perfectionism ignores. It means that shipping something imperfect teaches you more than planning something flawless. It means that action, even imperfect action, is almost always better than inaction, even well-reasoned inaction. Now, I want to challenge something you probably believe. I want to challenge the idea that discipline is what separates successful people from unsuccessful people. I want to suggest that discipline, as it's commonly understood, is mostly a myth. And chasing discipline is why most self-improvement fails. Here's what I mean. When most people think about discipline, they think about willpower. They think about forcing themselves to do things they don't want to do. They think about gritting their teeth and pushing through resistance. They think about being hard on themselves when they fail. And this model of discipline fails almost everyone who tries to use it, because willpower is a depletable resource. Study after study has shown that willpower functions like a battery. Every decision, every temptation resisted, every impulse controlled, drains the battery a little more. By the end of the day, most people's willpower batteries are running on empty. That's why you can maintain perfect discipline all day and then collapse into terrible choices at night. That's why you can eat perfectly until dinner and then destroy a whole pizza. That's why you can stay focused until evening and then scroll social media for 3 hours. You ran out of battery. The people you think of as disciplined haven't figured out how to have more willpower than you. They've figured out how to need less willpower. They've designed their environments so that the right choices require minimal effort and the wrong choices require maximum effort. They've built systems where excellence is the path of least resistance. They've made discipline unnecessary by making good behavior automatic. This is the shift that changes everything. Stop trying to have more discipline. Start trying to need less discipline. Stop trying to resist temptation. Start removing temptation. Stop trying to force yourself to do the right thing. Start making the right thing the easy thing. Here's a practical example of how this works. Sarah wanted to build a meditation habit. She tried for years using the discipline model. Every morning she told herself she would meditate. Most mornings she didn't. She'd sleep in or check her phone or get pulled into email. The meditation never happened, and she blamed herself for lacking discipline. Then she changed her approach. Instead of relying on discipline, she engineered her environment. She put her phone in another room overnight so she couldn't reach for it first thing in the morning. She placed a meditation cushion right next to her bed, so it was the first thing she saw when she woke up. She set her coffee maker on a timer, so the smell of brewing coffee would pull her out of bed. And she committed to just 5 minutes, which felt almost too easy to skip. Within a month, she hadn't missed a single day. Not because she had more discipline than before, because she needed less. The environment did the heavy lifting. The routine became automatic. The identity of someone who meditates every morning took root. Sarah didn't become more disciplined. She became more strategic. Think about someone trying to eat healthier through discipline alone. Every day they wake up and try to willpower their way through decisions. Should I eat this? Should I avoid that? Can I resist the break room donuts? Will I make it past the vending machine? Each decision drains their battery. Each temptation resisted depletes their reserves. By evening, they're exhausted, and the pizza wins. Now think about someone who approaches the same goal through environment design. They don't keep junk food in their house, not because they're disciplined, but because they were disciplined once. At the grocery store, when their willpower battery was full. Now they don't have to resist the junk food at night because there's no junk food to resist. They prep healthy meals on Sunday when they're motivated. Now they don't have to make good choices when they're tired because the good choices are already made. They bring lunch to work. Now they don't face the vending machine because they're never hungry when they pass it. Each environment decision multiplied their discipline by making willpower unnecessary. I knew a writer who was famously productive. People constantly asked him about his discipline. How did he write so many words every day? How did he stay focused? How did he resist distraction? His answer surprised everyone. He said, "I don't have any discipline. I've just arranged my life so I don't need any. I write in a cabin with no internet. I don't have a smartphone. My only computer is an old laptop that can't run anything except a word processor. When I'm in that cabin, writing is literally the only thing I can do. So I do it." People thought he was disciplined because they saw the output. But he didn't need discipline because he had eliminated every alternative. The environment did the work, his willpower just coasted. But environment design is only half of the equation. The other half is identity. Here's the difference between people who stick with new behaviors and people who don't. People who don't stick with new behaviors think in terms of outcomes. They say, "I want to lose 20 pounds. They say, "I want to write a book." They say, "I want to get in shape." People who stick with new behaviors think in terms of identity. They say, "I am someone who takes care of my body." They say, I am a writer. They say, I am an athlete. The difference matters enormously. When you're pursuing an outcome, every action is a means to an end. Once you achieve the outcome, or fail to achieve it, the motivation disappears. But when you're inhabiting an identity, every action is a vote for who you are. Each action reinforces the identity. Each action makes the next action more likely. The person who says, I'm trying to quit smoking, has to resist every cigarette. The person who says, I'm not a smoker, doesn't feel temptation the same way. Smoking isn't part of who they are. The behavior isn't forbidden, it's foreign. This is the discipline paradox. Less force creates more consistency. Less willpower creates more results. The people who appear most disciplined are often the ones relying on discipline least. They've engineered their environments. They've shifted their identities. They've made excellence automatic, so they can save their willpower for the moments that actually require it. What would it look like to apply this in your life? What environment changes would make your best behaviors your easy behaviors? What identity shifts would make discipline obsolete because the behaviors you want are simply who you are? Think about your physical space right now. What does it vote for? Does your home vote for health or for indulgence? Does your workspace vote for focus or for distraction? Does your bedroom vote for rest or for screens? Every environment is a ballot box, and you're voting with your design choices whether you know it or not. There's another trap that keeps people mediocre, and it's one of the most socially acceptable prisons ever constructed. It's called comparison. You are constantly comparing yourself to others. Not because you're insecure, although you might be, but because comparison is a deeply wired human instinct. Your ancestors survived partly by assessing their position in the social hierarchy. Being aware of where you stood relative to others was survival information. It told you who to defer to, who to challenge, who to ally with, who to avoid. The comparison instinct kept your ancestors alive, but it's keeping you miserable. Here's the problem. Your ancestors were comparing themselves to a tribe of maybe 150 people. They knew everyone. They understood context. They saw the full picture of each person's life. You are comparing yourself to billions of people. Not the real versions of those people, but the curated, filtered, highlighted versions they present on social media. You're comparing your behind the scenes to everyone else's highlight reel. You're comparing your ordinary moments to their extraordinary ones. You're comparing your struggles to their successes. And you're losing. Of course you're losing. The game is rigged. No one can win a comparison game played against the curated best moments of billions of people. Every time you compare, you find someone better than you, someone richer, someone prettier, someone more successful, someone further along, someone who seems to have it figured out while you're still struggling. The comparison machine will always find evidence that you're not enough, because that's what it's designed to do. Here's an experiment that reveals the insanity of comparison. Spend 1 hour on social media. Pay attention to how you feel before and after. If you're like most people, you'll start feeling relatively fine and end feeling vaguely inadequate. Not because anything changed in your life during that hour, but because you spent 60 minutes comparing your reality to everyone else's highlight reel. You compared your ordinary Tuesday to their vacation photos, their promotion announcements, their engagement rings, their perfect children, their motivational quotes posted from their beach houses. And of course, you came up short. How could you not? You were comparing your behind-the-scenes footage to their theatrical release. The comparison trap extends beyond social media. It shows up at work when you measure yourself against colleagues who seem to be advancing faster. It shows up in relationships when you compare your partnership to the idealized versions you imagine others have. It shows up in parenting when you judge your messy, real family against the curated images of perfect families you see everywhere. Comparison is everywhere because the instinct for comparison is ancient and powerful. But just because the instinct is ancient doesn't mean it's useful. Many of our ancient instincts are actively harmful in the modern world. Comparison may be the most harmful of all. But here's what the comparison trap actually steals from you. It steals your own definition of success. When you're constantly comparing, you adopt other people's metrics. You start wanting what they have instead of what you actually want. You start measuring yourself by standards that were never meant to be yours. You wake up one day having achieved someone else's dream and wondering why it feels so empty. Remember the lawyer I mentioned earlier? The one who made partner at 34 and felt nothing. She was living in the comparison trap. She had spent her entire career comparing herself to other lawyers, trying to bill more hours than them, trying to win bigger cases than them, trying to make partner faster than them. She won every comparison, and the victory was hollow, because she had never stopped to ask if these were the right things to compare. She had adopted the scoreboard without questioning whether she wanted to play the game. Your scoreboard matters more than any external measure. What does success actually look like for you? Not success according to your parents, not success according to your peers, not success according to Instagram. What would a life you were genuinely proud of look like? What would you need to have accomplished, experienced, created, contributed to feel that your one wild and precious life was well spent? Most people never define this. They just absorb society's definitions by default. Make money, get promoted, acquire status symbols, look successful. And they spend their entire lives climbing ladders they never chose, reaching summits they never wanted, winning games that were never theirs to play. I want you to think about this. If no one would ever know, what would you pursue? If there were no external rewards, no recognition, no admiration, no comparison, what would you spend your time on? That question probably feels uncomfortable, because it strips away all the external motivations and asks what actually matters to you. And most people have avoided that question for so long that they don't know how to answer it. The comparison cage has another insidious effect. It makes you postpone satisfaction. You tell yourself you'll be happy when you reach the next milestone, when you make more money, when you achieve the next goal, when you catch up to the person ahead of you. But comparison never ends. There's always someone ahead. The goalpost always moves. The satisfaction is always deferred. What if you could be satisfied now? Not complacent, not settling, but satisfied. What if you could pursue excellence, not because you need to prove yourself, but because excellence is intrinsically meaningful? What if you could grow not because you're deficient, but because growth is what alive things do? The people who escape the comparison cage don't stop comparing by willpower. They stop comparing by redefining the game. They create their own scoreboard. They choose their own metrics. They compete only with who they were yesterday. This is the only competition that actually matters. This is the only competition you can actually win. Are you better than you were yesterday? Are you moving in the direction you want to move? Are you showing up for the things you say matter? That's the only scoreboard that counts. Let me talk about something that separates the people who achieve their potential from the people who just dream about it. I call it the velocity problem. There's a gap between knowing and doing that destroys more potential than any other single factor. Most people know what they need to do. They've read the books, they've heard the advice, they've understood the concepts, and yet they don't do it. Why? Because knowing and doing are separated by a chasm, and the bridge across that chasm is speed. The gap between having an idea and executing it is measured in time, and that time is not neutral. Every moment you spend between knowing and doing, the likelihood of doing decreases. The enthusiasm fades. The fear grows. The doubts accumulate. The reasons not to act multiply. Momentum, once lost, is incredibly hard to recover. Think about the last great idea you had, the one that excited you, the one that kept you up at night, the one that felt like it could really be something. Where is that idea now? If you're like most people, it's dead. Not because it was a bad idea, not because you couldn't have executed it, but because you waited. You waited for conditions to be better. You waited for more clarity. You waited for less fear. And while you waited, the idea lost its energy. The excitement faded. The doubts crept in. Eventually, the idea that once felt urgent became just another thing you thought about doing someday. And someday, as you know, never comes. This is why people who move fast accomplish more than people who move slow. Not because they're smarter or more talented, but because they've learned that execution has a shelf life. They've learned that the perfect time is almost always right now. They've learned that speed is a strategic advantage that compounds over time. The physics of momentum apply to human achievement just as they apply to physical objects. An object at rest tends to stay at rest. An object in motion tends to stay in motion. When you're stopped, starting requires tremendous force. When you're moving, continuing requires very little. This is why the first step is always the hardest. This is why getting started matters more than getting it right. This is why imperfect action beats perfect planning every single time. Think about it this way. Two people have the same idea at the same time. Person A starts working on it immediately, imperfectly, incompletely, but immediately. Person B decides to plan more carefully, to wait for the right moment, to get all their ducks in a row. 6 months later, Person A has a working prototype, has learned from real-world feedback, has iterated and improved. Person B is still planning, still waiting, still getting ready. The gap between them is now enormous, not because of any difference in ability, just because of difference in velocity. I've seen this pattern play out hundreds of times. The person who starts imperfectly beats the person who waits for perfection. Every single time. Because starting creates momentum. Starting creates learning. Starting creates data. Starting creates improvement opportunities. Waiting creates nothing. There's a 72-hour rule that high performers intuitively understand. When you have an idea, when you learn something new, when you decide to make a change, you have about 72 hours to take meaningful action. After that, the probability of action drops dramatically. The enthusiasm decays. The urgency fades. The idea joins the graveyard of things you are going to do someday. This is why you can feel incredibly motivated after reading a book or attending a seminar, and then do absolutely nothing different. The motivation was real. But you didn't act within the window. You let the 72 hours pass. And the idea that once felt urgent started to feel optional. And optional became forgettable. And forgettable became forgotten. I want to tell you about someone who built a 7-figure business using nothing except velocity. She wasn't the smartest person in her industry. She wasn't the most experienced. She wasn't the best funded, but she was the fastest. While her competitors were planning, she was launching. While they were researching, she was testing. While they were discussing, she was learning. Her first product was embarrassing. It barely worked. It had obvious flaws. But it was out there, in the real world, generating real feedback, creating real learning. Her competitors were still polishing their first versions when she released her 5th. By the time they launched something comparable, she owned the market. She told me something I've never forgotten. She said, "Everyone thinks speed is about rushing. It's not. Speed is about removing the delays you don't need." Most people don't move slowly because they're thorough. They move slowly because they're afraid. Planning is a delay tactic. Preparation is a delay tactic. Perfectionism is a delay tactic. All the things that feel productive are often just fear wearing a productivity costume. The way to beat fear isn't to conquer it. It's to outrun it. Move faster than your fear can follow. The velocity problem shows up everywhere in life. In careers, where the person who asks for the promotion gets it, while the person who waits to be recognized waits forever. In relationships, where the person who says what they feel creates connection, while the person who holds back creates distance. In health, where the person who starts exercising today gets stronger, while the person who starts on Monday never does. In creativity, where the person who ships their work learns and grows, while the person who perfects in private never learns anything at all. Where in your life are you moving too slowly? Where are you waiting for conditions that will never arrive? Where have you let the 72-hour window close so many times that you've stopped having ideas worth acting on? The opposite of velocity isn't slowness. The opposite of velocity is stagnation. And stagnation, dressed up as prudence, is where potential goes to die. I want to share something that changed how I think about speed. In nature, nothing that stops growing survives for long. Plants that stop growing start dying. Animals that stop moving become prey. Ecosystems that stop evolving collapse. Growth and movement aren't optional, they're survival requirements. And the same is true for you. You are either growing or you are dying. You are either moving or you are stagnating. There is no neutral. There is no standing still. The universe doesn't allow it. When you move slowly, you create the illusion of stability. But that stability is a mirage. While you're standing still, the world is moving. Opportunities are passing. Competitors are advancing. Technology is evolving. Markets are shifting. The slow, deliberate approach that feels safe is actually dangerous. Because every day you're not moving is a day you're falling behind. This doesn't mean you should be reckless. It means you should distinguish between necessary preparation and unnecessary delay. It means you should recognize that most of what you call preparation is actually procrastination in disguise. It means you should bias toward action, knowing that action creates learning, and learning creates better action. Let me talk about something most people underestimate: the mathematics of your social circle. You've probably heard that you become the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. This gets repeated so often that it's become cliché. But cliches become cliches because they contain truth. And this particular truth has more scientific backing than most people realize. Your brain is an imitation machine. Mirror neurons fire when you observe behavior, essentially running a simulation of that behavior in your own neural pathways. You are literally, neurologically, becoming more like the people around you. Not through conscious choice, but through unconscious absorption. Their speech patterns become yours. Their beliefs become yours. Their standards become yours. This happens whether you want it to or not. This is why your choice of social circle is not a soft relationship choice. It's a strategic life choice. It's one of the most important decisions you make, even though most people make it passively, by default, without ever consciously choosing at all. Beyond neurology, there's simple social psychology. Humans are conformity machines. We adjust our behavior to match the groups we belong to. This was useful when group cohesion meant survival. But now it means something more insidious. It means the people around you are defining what normal looks like, and what you accept as normal becomes your ceiling. There's a famous experiment where researchers put a single participant in a room with several Confederates who were secretly working with the experimenters. The group was shown lines of clearly different lengths and asked which was longest. The Confederates deliberately gave the wrong answer. And here's the disturbing part. The real participants, knowing the answer was obviously wrong, went along with the group about 70% of the time. They literally denied what their eyes were seeing to conform to social pressure. If people will deny physical reality to fit in, imagine how easily they deny possibilities, ambitions, and dreams to match the expectations of their social group. If everyone around you makes $100,000, $100,000 feels like success. If everyone around you makes $1 million, $100,000 feels like failure. The facts haven't changed, only the reference group. But reference groups shape everything. They shape what you believe is possible. They shape what you believe is acceptable. They shape what you pursue and what you settle for. Here's a question that might be uncomfortable. Who in your life would be threatened if you achieved your potential? Who would feel diminished by your success? Who needs you to stay small so they can feel big? These questions matter because sometimes the people closest to us are the ones most invested in our limitations. Not because they're evil, not because they consciously want to hold us back, but because our growth implies something about their stagnation. Our ambition highlights their settling. Our transformation reminds them of the changes they've been avoiding. So they pull us back, usually with the very best intentions, into the comfortable mediocrity we're trying to escape. I know a man who transformed his entire life by changing one thing: his proximity. He grew up in a small town where ambition was quietly discouraged. People who wanted more were seen as thinking they were better than everyone else. Success was suspicious. Dreams were impractical. He absorbed these beliefs without questioning them. In his late 20s, he moved to a city where the opposite norms prevailed. Suddenly, he was surrounded by people who took risks, people who talked about their ambitions openly, people who were building things, creating things, betting on themselves. At first, he felt like an imposter. These people seemed to be from a different planet. But after a year, he noticed something. He had started thinking like them. Not because he was trying to, because proximity did the work. Their normal had become his normal. Their possible had become his possible. Within 3 years, he had started a company, tripled his income, and was pursuing goals he wouldn't have even allowed himself to imagine in his previous environment. He told me, "I didn't become a different person. I just became myself in a different context. And context is almost everything. This is why the question of who you spend time with is not a soft, feel-good question. It's a hard, strategic question. Every hour you spend with people who have lower standards is an hour pulling you toward those standards. Every day you spend in an environment of mediocrity is a day your brain is recalibrating mediocrity as normal. I'm not suggesting you abandon everyone who isn't successful. That would be sociopathic and stupid. But I am suggesting you take inventory. Who are your 5 closest contacts? What are their standards? What do they believe is possible? What do they believe is acceptable? Because whatever they believe, you're absorbing. Whatever they accept as normal, you're accepting as normal. There's another dimension to this that people don't discuss enough. It's not just about surrounding yourself with successful people. It's about surrounding yourself with growing people. Static success isn't inspiring. It's just another form of stagnation. You want to be around people who are in motion, people who are becoming more, people who haven't peaked and are hungry for their next level. Growth is contagious. So is stagnation. The question is which contagion you're exposing yourself to. But here's where it gets uncomfortable. Sometimes upgrading your environment means having difficult conversations with people you care about. Sometimes it means spending less time with friends who have settled. Sometimes it means creating distance from family members who pull you toward their limitations. This isn't cruelty. It's self-preservation. And ultimately, it's also service. Because when you reach your potential, you have more to give everyone, including the people you needed distance from. I want you to think about your current circle, not with judgment, but with honesty. Who elevates your standards? Who maintains them? Who diminishes them? These are important questions, and the answers might require action you've been avoiding. Now let's talk about what's really stopping you, because it's probably not what you think. Most people believe their obstacles are external. They think they're stopped by lack of time, lack of money, lack of resources, lack of support. But after decades of studying high performers, I can tell you with certainty that the primary obstacle is almost always internal. The primary obstacle is fear. Fear is the great disguiser. It rarely presents itself honestly. It dresses up as logic. It masquerades as prudence. It costumes itself as waiting for the right time. Fear is incredibly sophisticated at hiding its true nature. But make no mistake, what's stopping you isn't external circumstances. What's stopping you is terror that you've learned to call something else. I want to tell you about a woman named Grace who spent 15 years in a career she hated. Not disliked, hated. Every Sunday night, she felt a knot forming in her stomach. Every Monday morning, she fantasized about calling in sick. Every Friday afternoon, she counted the hours until freedom. And yet she stayed. For 15 years, she stayed. When I asked her why, she had all the reasonable explanations. The health insurance, the retirement benefits, the stability in an uncertain economy, the fact that she had good colleagues and a reasonable boss. Each explanation made perfect sense. Each one was completely logical. But underneath all the logic was something she didn't want to admit. She was terrified, not of her job, of what leaving would require. Leaving would require her to face the unknown. Leaving would require her to bet on herself. Leaving would require her to risk failure in front of everyone who had ever known her as the responsible one, the stable one, the one who had it figured out. The job she hated was a prison, yes, but it was a familiar prison. The walls were covered with 15 years of memories. The routine was etched into her bones. The identity of person who works here was so deeply embedded, she couldn't imagine who she'd be without it. Grace finally left on her 47th birthday, not because the fear went away, but because something else became stronger. The fear of waking up on her 67th birthday, still counting down to Friday, still dreading Monday, still telling herself that next year she'd make a change. That fear, the fear of a life unlived, finally outweighed the fear of change. Sometimes that's what it takes. Sometimes we don't move towards something better. We move away from something we can no longer tolerate. Fear operates in predictable patterns. There's fear of failure, the obvious one, the terror that you'll try and fall short and have to face your own inadequacy. There's fear of success, the sneaky one, the terror that you'll achieve what you want and then have to sustain it, expand it, live up to it. There's fear of judgment, the terror that others will see you differently, think less of you, talk about you behind your back. And there's fear of change itself, the terror that becoming who you could be means leaving behind who you've always been. Each of these fears has the same outcome: paralysis. Each of these fears leads to the same place: mediocrity. And here's the brutal truth: the fears don't go away, ever. The most successful people you admire feel the same fears you feel. They just feel the fears and act anyway. They've learned that courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is the decision that something matters more than fear. There's a concept in psychology called exposure therapy. It's one of the most effective treatments for anxiety disorders. The basic idea is simple. You gradually expose yourself to the thing you fear, starting with small doses and building up to larger ones. Over time, the fear decreases, not because you've mastered the fear intellectually, but because your nervous system has learned through experience that the feared outcome doesn't happen. Or if it does happen, you survive it. This same principle applies to pursuing your potential. You don't overcome fear of failure by thinking differently. You overcome fear of failure by failing small, surviving, and building tolerance. You don't overcome fear of judgment by affirmations. You overcome fear of judgment by being judged, surviving, and realizing it didn't kill you. The way out of fear is through it, not around it, not over it, through it. I want you to close your eyes for a moment. Picture yourself at the end of your life. You're old, your body has worn down, your time is almost up, and you're looking back at your life as it actually happened. Not as you wished it happened, as it actually happened. You see every moment you let fear win, every opportunity you declined because it felt too risky, every dream you abandoned because it seemed impractical, every version of yourself you killed before it could be born. What does that feel like? What does it feel like to see a life shaped more by fear than by courage? What does it feel like to know that you had one shot, one precious life, and you spent it playing small because you were too afraid to play big? Now open your eyes. That feeling, right there, that's what's at stake. That's what fear costs when you obey it. That's the price of mediocrity measured in a currency far more valuable than money. The good news is that fear, once named, loses some of its power. When fear operates unconsciously, It controls everything. But when you drag fear into the light, when you name it specifically, when you articulate exactly what you're afraid of, it becomes just another factor to consider, rather than an invisible dictator running your life. So let me ask you directly, what are you afraid of? Not in general, specifically. What outcome are you terrified might happen if you truly pursued your potential? Name it. Say it out loud if you can. Write it down if you have to. But name it. Because unnamed fears grow in the dark. Named fears shrink in the light. Here's something that might surprise you. Consistency beats intensity every single time. The person who shows up every day, even at 50% capacity, will outperform the person who shows up brilliantly once a week and then disappears. This is true in fitness. This is true in business. This is true in relationships. This is true in creativity. This is true everywhere. The reason is simple mathematics. Small, consistent actions compound. Brilliant, inconsistent actions don't. A tiny improvement every day creates massive transformation over time. A massive effort followed by nothing creates nothing. The person who writes 200 words every single day will produce more, learn more, and improve more than the person who writes 5,000 words once a month when inspiration strikes. But consistency has an enemy. That enemy is motivation. Motivation is what people wait for before acting. And waiting for motivation is why most people never build anything consistent. Because motivation is a visitor. It comes and goes. It appears without warning and disappears just as mysteriously. Building a life on motivation is like building a house on a cloud. It looks beautiful when it's there, but it won't hold any weight. Here's what most people don't understand about motivation. It doesn't precede action. It follows action. You don't get motivated and then act. You act and then get motivated. The people who seem highly motivated aren't people who feel like doing things more than you do. They're people who have learned to act without feeling like it. They've learned that waiting for motivation is a trap. They've learned that the only reliable motivation comes after you start, not before. Think about exercise. Almost no one feels like working out before they start. The bed is warm, the gym is cold. The couch is comfortable. Every fiber of your being is generating reasons to stay where you are. But once you start, once you get moving, once you break a sweat, suddenly you feel different. The motivation that was absent before you started appears during the activity. This is how motivation actually works. It's a reward for action, not a prerequisite for it. The alternative to motivation is system design. You build systems that don't require you to feel like it. You create structures that operate regardless of your emotional state. You establish routines so ingrained that not doing them feels stranger than doing them. There's a principle called the minimum viable effort. The idea is to define the smallest possible action that still counts as showing up. For writing, it might be 50 words. For exercise, it might be 5 minutes. For meditation, it might be 1 minute. The minimum viable effort is too small to require motivation, too small to justify not doing, too small to fail at. Why does this work? Because the minimum viable effort changes the game from achievement to identity. You're not trying to write a novel. You're trying to be someone who writes every day. You're not trying to run a marathon. You're trying to be someone who exercises. You're not trying to achieve enlightenment. You're trying to be someone who meditates. The minimum viable effort is proof of identity. Each day you do it, you're casting a vote for who you are. Each vote makes the next vote more likely. And eventually, the identity is so established that the behavior requires no effort at all. Here's what happens when you commit to the minimum viable effort. On bad days, you do the minimum. On good days, you do more. But you never do zero. And never doing zero is what creates consistency. Never doing zero is what builds the identity of someone who shows up. Never doing zero is what compounds into transformation. The people who seem extraordinarily consistent haven't found some secret reservoir of discipline. They've found the minimum viable effort that works for them. They've discovered what they can do on their worst day and committed to that. Everything above, that is bonus, but the floor is never zero. I know a woman who wanted to start running. She'd tried before and failed. Every attempt ended the same way. She'd run too much, get sore, skip a day, skip another day, and quit. This time, she tried something different. She committed to putting on her running shoes and stepping outside. That's it. She didn't have to run. She just had to put on the shoes and go outside. Most days, once she was outside, she ran. But some days, she just stood on her porch for a minute and went back inside. It didn't matter. She had kept her commitment. She had shown up. 3 years later, she finished her first marathon. Not because she found motivation, because she found the minimum viable effort that kept her chain unbroken long enough for the habit to take over. There's another principle that pairs with minimum viable effort. I call it the 2-day rule. Never miss twice. Missing once is an event. Missing twice is the beginning of a pattern. Once you miss twice, the third miss becomes easy. Then the fourth. Then you're not someone who does the thing anymore. You're someone who used to do the thing. The 2-day rule gives you grace without giving you permission to quit. It acknowledges that life happens, that you'll miss days, that perfection is impossible, but it draws a hard line at 2. Miss once, no problem. Miss twice, emergency. What would it look like to apply this to your life? What minimum viable efforts could you commit to? What daily actions are so important that you should never miss 2 days in a row? These questions aren't abstract. They're architectural. The answers form the foundation of the life you're building. Let me challenge one more belief. The belief that you know who you are. You think you know yourself. You think you've figured out your personality, your preferences, your strengths, your weaknesses, your limits. But most of what you call self-knowledge is just self-history. You're not describing who you are. You're describing who you've been. And who you've been has no authority over who you could become. Your identity is not fixed. Your identity is a story you tell yourself. And stories can be rewritten. The person you've always been is just one draft. You can write another. Consider how identity forms in the first place. You weren't born knowing who you are. You constructed that knowledge over time through experiences, feedback, and interpretation. As a child, you tried things. Some worked, some didn't. People responded to you in certain ways. You drew conclusions. You built a narrative. This is who I am. This is what I'm good at. This is what I'm bad at. This is what's possible for me. This is what's not. That narrative felt like discovery. It felt like you were uncovering a pre-existing truth about yourself. But you weren't. You were constructing a story. And the construction was shaped by limited data, biased interpretations, and the random circumstances of your environment. A child who is told they're not artistic will often stop drawing. A teenager who fails their first public speech may decide they're not a speaker. A young adult who experiences rejection may conclude they're not lovable. Each of these conclusions is drawn from insufficient evidence. Each of these conclusions is generalized far beyond what the data supports. And each of these conclusions, once embedded in identity, becomes self-fulfilling. The child who believes they're not artistic doesn't practice art, and so they never become artistic. The teenager who believes they're not a speaker avoids speaking, and so they never become comfortable with it. The young adult who believes they're unlovable pushes people away, and so they never experience consistent love. The belief creates the behavior that confirms the belief. This is simultaneously liberating and terrifying. Liberating because it means your past doesn't determine your future. Terrifying because it means you can't hide behind "I'm just not that kind of person anymore." If identity is malleable, then your current limitations are chosen, not imposed. There's a phenomenon psychologists call sunk cost fallacy. People continue investing in things that aren't working because of how much they've already invested. The same fallacy applies to identity. You continue being who you've always been, partly because of how much you've invested in that version of yourself. You've built relationships around it. You've made decisions based on it. You've constructed an entire life that assumes it. Walking away feels like admitting that all of that was somehow wrong. But there's another way to look at it. The person you've been was necessary to get you here. Without that person, without those experiences, without those choices, you wouldn't be prepared for who you're about to become. You're not abandoning your past self. You're graduating from them. I talked to a man who, at 52, completely reinvented himself. He'd been in finance his entire career, good at it, successful at it, but deeply unfulfilled by it. At 52, he quit. He went back to school to become a therapist. Everyone thought he was having a crisis, but he told me he was having a clarity. He said, "I finally realized that the person I'd built was a character I was playing, not who I actually was. I was good at playing that character, but the character was suffocating the person underneath. When I quit, I wasn't losing anything real. I was putting down a costume I'd been wearing so long I'd forgotten it was a costume. People said I was brave to reinvent myself at 52, but it felt like the opposite. It felt like I was finally stopping the brave act of pretending to be someone I wasn't. Who are you pretending to be? What version of yourself have you outgrown but not yet released? What costume are you wearing that you've forgotten is a costume? The reinvention question isn't if you'll need to evolve. It's when, and how gracefully, and how courageously. The people who reach their potential are people who reinvent themselves multiple times. They don't cling to who they were. They don't defend identities that no longer serve them. They hold their sense of self loosely enough to update it when the evidence demands an update. This requires something that doesn't get talked about enough. It requires grieving. When you let go of an old identity, even one that was limiting you, there's a loss. You're losing someone you knew. You're losing someone you'd figured out. You're losing the comfort of predictability. Grieving that loss is appropriate. Refusing to grieve it keeps you stuck. I want to invite you to think about who you need to become, not what you need to achieve, who you need to become. Because achievement follows identity. What you do follows from who you are. If you want different results, You need to become a different person. Not a better version of the same person, a different person entirely. What would that person believe? What would that person value? What would that person do on a Tuesday morning? What would that person never do? Draw that picture clearly. Make that person vivid. Because that clarity is the first step in the transformation. We're approaching the end of this journey together, and I want to leave you with something that might seem morbid, but is actually the most clarifying exercise I know. Think about your death, not in a depressing way, in a focusing way. You will die. This is not pessimism. This is physics. And that death, whenever it comes, will end your opportunity to become who you could have been. The clock is running, and it's running faster than you think. Most people live as if they're immortal, not consciously. No one actually believes they'll live forever, but behaviorally, practically, they act as if time is infinite. They postpone the important things because there's always tomorrow. They delay the meaningful conversations because there will be another chance. They push off the dreams because someday they'll have more time, more money, more courage. But someday is a lie. Someday doesn't exist on any calendar. Someday is just the story we tell ourselves to justify putting off today what we know we should be doing. What would change if you knew you only had 1 year left? What projects would you start? What conversations would you have? What relationships would you repair? What truths would you finally speak? What risks would you finally take? These aren't hypothetical questions. These are questions about what actually matters to you. And the only reason you're not doing those things right now is the illusion that you have unlimited time. There's been extensive research on what dying people regret. Nurses who work in palliative care have documented this. The regrets are remarkably consistent. People rarely regret the things they did. They regret the things they didn't do. They regret the risks they didn't take, the dreams they didn't pursue, the words they didn't say, the love they didn't express, the person they didn't become. The top 5 regrets of the dying, according to this research, are painfully predictable. First, I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me. Second, I wish I hadn't worked so hard. Third, I wish I'd had the courage to express my feelings. Fourth, I wish I had stayed in touch with my friends. Fifth, I wish I had let myself be happier. Notice what's not on this list. No one regrets taking too many chances. No one regrets being too bold. No one regrets failing while trying something meaningful. The regrets are always about what didn't happen. Always about the roads not taken. Always about the life that could have been but wasn't. No one on their deathbed has ever said, "I wish I'd been more careful. I wish I'd played it safer. I wish I'd taken fewer chances." The regrets are always in the other direction, always about the unlived life, always about the unexpressed potential, always about the choice of comfort over meaning. This is the ultimate cost of mediocrity, not a missed promotion, not an unreached financial goal. The ultimate cost of mediocrity is lying on your deathbed, knowing you had more in you and you never let it out. Knowing you were capable of more, and you settled for less. Knowing you had one life, one chance, one brief flicker of existence in an infinite universe, and you spent it playing small. I want you to try something. Imagine writing your own eulogy. Not the eulogy someone else would give, the eulogy that would tell the truth about who you were and what you did with your time. If you kept living the way you're living now, what would that eulogy say? Would it speak of courage or caution? Would it speak of risks taken or risks avoided? Would it speak of potential fulfilled or potential buried? Now write a different eulogy. The eulogy you want. The eulogy that reflects the person you're capable of becoming. What does that eulogy say? What accomplishments does it list? What challenges does it describe you overcoming? What impact does it say you made? The gap between those two eulogies is your work. That gap is why you're listening to this. That gap is what you have left of your life to close. But here's the thing about the gap. It doesn't close automatically. It doesn't close through good intentions. It doesn't close through understanding. The gap only closes through action, through decision, through the daily choice to be the person in the second eulogy instead of the person in the first. Every day, you're voting. You're voting for which eulogy will be read. You're voting with your time, your energy, your attention, your choices. And those votes compound. The votes you cast today make certain votes more likely tomorrow. Cast enough mediocre votes and mediocrity becomes your destiny. Cast enough courageous votes and courage becomes who you are. Mediocrity is a choice. I've said it throughout this audiobook, and I'll say it one final time. Mediocrity is not something that happens to you. It's not imposed by circumstances. It's not determined by your genes. Mediocrity is a choice. A choice you make every single day, in every single moment, through every single action. But here's the good news. If mediocrity is a choice, then excellence is also a choice. If playing small is a vote you cast, then playing big is a vote available to you. The same freedom that allows you to choose mediocrity allows you to choose magnificence. You just have to make a different choice. What will you choose? Not tomorrow. Not when conditions are better. Not when you feel ready. What will you choose right now, in this moment, with the life you have and the circumstances you're in? The honest truth is that most people who listen to this will do nothing. They'll feel inspired for a few hours, maybe a few days. And then the familiar patterns will reassert themselves. The excuses will return. The fears will win. The comfortable mediocrity will pull them back in. And in a month, this audiobook will be a faded memory instead of a turning point. But some people will be different. Some people will take what they've heard and actually change. They'll make a decision right now, in this moment, that they're not going to be average anymore. They'll take action within the next 24 hours that proves they're serious. They'll start before they're ready, act before they're certain, move before they're motivated. They'll choose differently. Which one will you be? I can't answer that for you. No one can. The choice is yours and yours alone. But I can tell you what I believe about you. I believe you have more potential than you've ever accessed. I believe you're capable of things that would astonish you if you ever actually attempted them. I believe the mediocrity you've settled into is a betrayal of what you could become. And I believe that somewhere inside you, buried under the excuses and fears and comfortable lies, there's a version of yourself that knows this is true. That version has been waiting for you to stop making excuses, waiting for you to stop being afraid, waiting for you to finally take the potential seriously and do something about it. The wait is over. The truth has been told. The mirror has been raised. You can't claim ignorance anymore. You can't pretend you don't know what you're capable of or what's been holding you back. The only question left is what you'll do in the next 24 hours that proves you heard this. Not what you'll do someday. Not what you'll do when you're ready. what you'll do tomorrow. Because tomorrow is the only day that matters. Tomorrow is the only day you can actually live. Mediocrity will always be an option. It will be there tomorrow and the next day and every day after that, waiting for you, welcoming you, offering its comfortable embrace. But after today, mediocrity will never again be an accident. You know too much now. You've seen too clearly. From this moment forward, if you choose mediocrity, you'll choose it with your eyes open. You'll choose it knowing exactly what you're giving up. You'll choose it without the comfort of ignorance or the excuse of confusion. There's a certain tragic beauty in how most lives unfold. People start with dreams. Big, audacious, impossible dreams. Children don't dream of being average. They dream of being astronauts, rock stars, presidents, inventors, heroes. But somewhere along the way, those dreams get edited. Reality intrudes. Well-meaning adults explain what's practical. Peers mock what's different. Failures accumulate. And slowly, imperceptibly, the dreams shrink. The astronaut becomes an accountant. The rock star becomes a middle manager. The president becomes someone who complains about politics while doing nothing about them. The inventor becomes someone who watches other people's inventions on television. The hero becomes someone who plays it safe. This isn't inevitable. This is a choice. A choice made so gradually that it doesn't feel like a choice at all. But it is. Every dream you abandoned was abandoned by choice. Every aspiration you released was released by choice. Every version of yourself you killed was killed by choice. And the sum of those choices is the life you're living now. My hope is that you won't. My hope is that this audiobook marks a before and after in your life. My hope is that when you look back years from now, you'll remember this as the moment things shifted. Not because of anything magical in these words, but because you finally decided to take yourself seriously. You finally decided to stop betraying your potential. You finally decided that mediocrity, whatever comfort it offered, wasn't worth the cost. The choice is yours. It's always been yours. Now you know it. What happens next is up to you. I want to leave you with a story. It's the story of a man who waited too long. His name was Robert. He was 73 years old, and he was dying. Cancer. The diagnosis had come 6 months earlier. The prognosis was clear. He had weeks, maybe a month. And in those final days, Robert did something he had never done in his entire life. He talked about his regrets. For 73 years, Robert had been practical. He'd done what was expected. He'd taken the safe path. He'd never rocked the boat. He'd never bet on himself. He'd never said the things he really felt or done the things he really wanted. He'd played by the rules. And now, at the end, he saw what that had cost him. "I had a good life," he said. "Good by every normal measure. Good job, good family, good reputation, good health until this. But I never had a great life. I never had a life that was mine. I spent 73 years living someone else's definition of success. And now, I'm out of time to live my own." Robert died 3 weeks after that conversation. He died with his regrets still burning. He died having never written the novel he'd always imagined, never started the business he'd always dreamed about, never told certain people how he really felt, never became the person he glimpsed sometimes in his quietest moments. That person died with him, unborn, unrealized, unexpressed. I tell you this story not to depress you. I tell you this story because you still have time. Robert ran out. You haven't. The things Robert wished he'd done, you can still do. The person Robert never became, you can still become. The regrets Robert carried to his grave, you can still prevent. But only if you act. Only if you choose differently. Only if you stop waiting for conditions to be perfect and start creating conditions that are good enough. The difference between Robert's story and your story is that your story is still being written. The ending hasn't been decided yet. You get to choose. Right now, today, this moment, you get to choose whether your story ends with regret or with fulfillment, with potential wasted or potential realized, with a life lived according to someone else's rules or a life lived according to your own. You've spent hours with me exploring the architecture of mediocrity and the blueprint for excellence. You've examined the comfort conspiracy that keeps people safe but stagnant. You've dismantled the mythology of talent that lets people off the hook. You've exposed the excuse patterns that protect the ego while imprisoning potential. You've understood decision debt and how unmade choices compound into paralysis. You've learned that discipline is a design problem, not a willpower problem. You've escaped the comparison cage and defined your own scoreboard. You've confronted the velocity problem and the cost of moving too slowly. You've faced the mathematical reality of your social circle. You've named your fears and understood that they never disappear. They just get outvoted by courage. You've mastered the consistency code and the minimum viable effort. You've embraced the reinvention mandate and permission to become unrecognizable. And you've looked through the legacy lens at the life you want to be remembered for. Each of these concepts, on its own, could change your life. But together, they form something more powerful than any single idea. They form a complete system for escaping mediocrity and building a life that matches your potential. The comfort conspiracy taught you that your brain is not your friend when it comes to growth, and that comfort, unchecked, becomes a prison. The lesson is to seek discomfort deliberately, to treat it as the currency of growth, to recognize that every time you feel the pull toward ease, you're at a choice point. The talent myth taught you that excellence is built, not born, and that the abilities you've dismissed as not for you are actually abilities you simply haven't developed yet. The lesson is to stop using talent as an excuse and start using practice as a strategy. The excuse architecture taught you that your explanations for inaction are not descriptions of reality, but constructions of your ego, designed to protect you from the responsibility of your own potential. The lesson is to stop believing your excuses and start taking radical responsibility for your life. Decision debt taught you that unmade choices accumulate cognitive interest, draining your energy and focus until you can barely function. The lesson is to decide fast, clear the backlog, and keep your mental bandwidth free for what matters. The discipline delusion taught you that willpower is a depleting resource, and that trying to force your way to excellence is a losing strategy. The lesson is to design your environment and your identity so that good behavior becomes automatic and discipline becomes unnecessary. The comparison cage taught you that measuring yourself against others is a game you can never win and a trap that steals your own definition of success. The lesson is to create your own scoreboard and compete only with who you were yesterday. The velocity problem taught you that speed of execution separates achievers from dreamers, and that waiting for perfect conditions is just another form of refusing. The lesson is to start immediately, iterate relentlessly, and never let the 72-hour window close without action. The isolation equation taught you that your social circle is not neutral, but is actively shaping your standards, your beliefs, and your ceiling. The lesson is to curate your proximity, even when it's uncomfortable, and to find people who pull you up instead of holding you back. The fear inventory taught you that fear never leaves, but can be outvoted by purpose, that naming fears diminishes their power, and that courage is not the absence of fear, but action despite it. The lesson is to stop waiting until you're not afraid and start acting while you're terrified. The consistency code taught you that showing up imperfectly beats performing brilliantly once in a while, that the minimum viable effort is the key to unbreakable habits, and that identity precedes achievement. The lesson is to define who you're becoming and vote for that person every single day. The reinvention mandate taught you that your identity is a draft, not a final copy, and that clinging to who you've always been prevents you from becoming who you could be. The lesson is to hold your sense of self loosely, to grieve old versions when necessary, and to give yourself permission to become unrecognizable. And the legacy lens taught you that time is limited, that the biggest regrets come from what you didn't do, and that the quality of your life will ultimately be measured not by comfort achieved, but by potential expressed. The lesson is to live from your eulogy backward, making choices today that your future self will thank you for. That's a lot. It's more than most people ever consciously examine. Give yourself credit for that. Give yourself credit for being willing to look in the mirror when most people spend their lives avoiding their own reflection. But knowledge without action is just entertainment. And I didn't share all of this to entertain you. I shared it to change you. Or more precisely, to give you the tools to change yourself. So here's what I want you to do. Before you do anything else, before you move on to the next thing, before the insights fade and the urgency dissipates, I want you to take one action. Just one. The smallest possible action that signals to yourself and to the universe that you're serious. It could be sending an email you've been avoiding. It could be making a call you've been postponing. It could be writing down a goal you've never told anyone. It could be signing up for something that scares you. It could be having a conversation you've been dreading. It doesn't matter what it is. What matters is that it's something. What matters is that it happens in the next 24 hours. What matters is that you prove to yourself that you're not just another person who listened to something inspiring and did nothing with it. This is the moment of truth. This is where most people fail. They hear the message, they feel the motivation, they understand the concepts, and then they do nothing. They let the 72-hour window close. They let the urgency fade. They let the excuses return. And within a week, this audiobook is a distant memory, and nothing has changed. Don't be that person. You've invested hours in this. You've listened carefully. You've thought deeply. Don't waste that investment by walking away unchanged. Honor it by taking action. Prove to yourself that you're capable of breaking the pattern. Show yourself that you can hear something important and actually do something about it. The action doesn't have to be big. In fact, it shouldn't be big. Big actions are easy to postpone. Small actions are easy to take. And small actions taken consistently create the momentum that makes big changes possible. So, pick something small, something you can do today, something that will take less than 15 minutes, and do it. Not tomorrow, today. Not when you feel ready. Now. Can you do that? Can you take one action in the next 24 hours? The answer is yes. Of course you can. The question isn't ability. It's willingness. It's choice. And that's what everything comes down to, isn't it? Choice. You chose to listen to this. That was a choice. You chose to stay until the end. That was a choice. Now you get to choose what happens next. That's also a choice. The most important choice. Choose well. Your potential is waiting. It's been waiting your whole life. It's patient, but it's not infinite. One day the window closes. One day the opportunity expires. One day the potential that could have been becomes the potential that never was. Don't let that happen. Not because of fear. Not because some audiobook told you to be afraid, but because you're capable of so much more than you've been living. Because the world needs what you have. Because the alternative, a life of comfortable mediocrity, is a tragedy dressed up as sensibility. The world is full of people who settled, people who accepted good enough, people who stopped reaching for what they knew they were capable of. Those people have families, they have jobs, they have mortgages and vacations and hobbies. By every external measure, they're fine. But inside, in the quiet moments, in the early morning hours when the defenses are down, they know. They know they had more in them. They know they played it safe when they should have played it big. They know they chose comfort over meaning, security over significance, the predictable path over the uncertain one. That knowledge is a weight they carry every day, even when they pretend otherwise. You don't have to join them. That's the message underneath everything I've shared. You don't have to be one of the people who wonders what might have been. You can be one of the people who finds out. But only if you choose. Only if you act. Only if you stop being a spectator in your own life and start being the protagonist. You were not born to be average. You were born to be you. The fullest, most expressed, most alive version of you. That version is possible. That version is waiting. Stop making it wait. This is your moment. This is your choice. This is your life. Use it. Mediocrity is a choice. Make a different one. Starting now. I believe in you. Not in a vague, motivational way. In a real way. I believe that if you've made it this far, you have something in you that most people lack. A hunger. A dissatisfaction with ordinary. A refusal to accept that this is all there is. That hunger is not common. Most people have made peace with mediocrity. Most people have accepted that their best days are behind them. Most people have stopped believing that real change is possible. But not you. You're still listening. You're still searching. You're still hungry for more. That hunger is precious. Protect it. Feed it. Never let anyone convince you to let it go. The people who tell you to be realistic, to lower your expectations, to accept what is rather than chasing what could be, those people have given up on themselves, and they want you to join them in their surrender. Don't. Your hunger for more is not naive. It's not unrealistic. It's not immature. Your hunger is the voice of your potential, calling out to be expressed. It's the part of you that knows you were meant for more than comfort and compromise. It's the force that will drive you to become who you're capable of being, if you let it. Feed that hunger. Act on that dissatisfaction. Honor that refusal. The extraordinary life you're capable of is built one non-mediocre choice at a time. Make the first one today. Make another one tomorrow. Keep making them until the person in the mirror matches the person in your potential. You can do this. You know you can. Now, prove it. The brutal truth about your potential is that it's real. It exists. It's not a fantasy or a false hope or wishful thinking. Your potential is as real as the chair you're sitting in or the ground beneath your feet. The only question has ever been whether you would access it or bury it. The even more brutal truth is that your potential has an expiration date. You don't have forever to become who you're capable of being. The window is open now, but it won't be open forever. Every year that passes without action is a year of potential that can never be recovered. Every day you postpone is a day you'll never get back. Today you've been given a map. You've been shown exactly what's been keeping you stuck and exactly what it would take to get unstuck. You've been told the truth when lies would have been more comfortable. What you do with this map is up to you. You can fold it up and forget about it. You can add it to the pile of good advice you've received and ignored. You can go back to your comfortable mediocrity and pretend this conversation never happened. Or you can use it. You can study it. You can follow it out of the prison you've built and into the life you're capable of living. The choice has always been yours. Now you know it. Now you feel it. Now you can't unknow it or unfeel it. Mediocrity is a choice. You know that now. You know it in your bones. What will you choose instead? The answer to that question is the answer to everything. The answer to that question is your life. Choose wisely. Choose boldly. Choose now. Your potential is waiting for your decision. Don't keep it waiting any longer. This is where our time together ends. But this is also where your real work begins. The audiobook is over. Your life continues. What happens in that life from this moment forward is the only thing that matters. I've given you everything I have. Now it's your turn. Go become who you were meant to be. The world is waiting for that person. So am I. Thank you for listening. Thank you for staying. Thank you for caring enough about your potential to spend these hours with me. Now go make it matter. Mediocrity is a choice. Choose differently. Start now.